It's a great pleasure for us to host Nassim Taleb to Dartmouth. Nassim, as you probably know by now, has been a pretty influential thinker for the last 3 decades, but particularly since he published...
older than I am.
particularly since he published The Black Swan, which I looked it up. Nassim is cited by 100,000 people in various publications. I looked in Google Scholar. You should know this. It's good for you. It's good for your career.
What career?
Huh?
What career?
Nassim came of age in Lebanon during the Civil War that only in retrospect seemed predictable. Little wonder he spent his remarkable career teaching us about how to manage risk. His profession, he once told me, is probability, but his vocation is showing how the unpredictable is increasingly probable. He taught us to be irritated by economists, officials, journalists, and executives who take averages from empirical data and suppose that our tomorrows are likely to be pretty much the same as our yesterdays. He taught us about fat tails there. Fat tails, events that seem statistically remote, but contribute most to outcomes by precipitating chain reactions, say, viruses that spread, software that goes viral. He taught us about the dangers of connectivity that enable exponential growth. He taught us about the dangers of connectivity that expose us to malicious or compromised nodes in the network whose threats once could be isolated but now move and spread instantaneously. He taught us about how fragile connected systems are and how fragile connected systems are and how seriously we have to take anti-fragile measures that make us more robust, even at the cost of some illusory notion of efficiency, about the importance of storerooms and cash reserves and many supply chains and circuit breakers and separation of powers. He taught us, a former options trader that he was, about how to hedge against, even profit from, our inevitable reversals. He taught us about how in an uncertain world, our choices actually become easier because they focus us on doing what we must avoid, which is reckless behavior, while increasing our flexibility. He taught us finally about how to contain our incipient recklessness, how we need to insist that all have skin in the game, face moral hazards, suffer the consequence of our action. He taught us, as only he can, about Hammurabi Code. Now we are confronting a world in which network effects are being put on steroids. Nodes are able to process unimaginable amounts of data and turn them into what can seem like human creations. AI's large language models may not be as capable as humans, but we seem nevertheless to be meeting them halfway. Nassim has made clear to me that he does not consider himself an expert on AI. Yet I can't think of anyone who is better qualified to talk with us about the dangers we may face from technologies we just barely understand in networks that we do understand, largely thanks to him. With great pleasure, Nassim Taleb.
I'm very honored, but he gave me, Professor Avishai gave me way too much credit. But I think that if it would have been shorter, because what I think I contributed to mostly is fragility, is mapping fragility to accelerated nonlinear response. Why they must come together. Everything else is pretty much other people's ideas, largely my grandmother. But this mapping, so that's sort of But I'm very honored also to be here because I've read him before he read me, all right? And also you guys have a wonderful setup here, wonderful campus, very well positioned, shielded from New Yorkers and stuff like that. And you have a valley, and so entry points are scarce. So this is a wonderful campus, and I'm honored to be the first time in that great institution.
Nassim, let's start with some of the basics. I feel like most of us intuitively understand the dangers of connectivity, but I think that you've given it a kind of precision. You've given that danger a kind of precision, and I'd like to hear you talk about it, because before we talk about AI, I think it makes sense for everyone to understand what you considered to be the dangers of networks before AI became a serious problem.
Yeah, so let me give a very simple metaphor. A story I gave in the Black Swan, so I'll be repeating myself with that story, but it illustrates both fat tails and connectivity. Let's assume that you're in the 19th century and you're an opera singer. Okay, you're an opera singer in Boston or in Naples. You're protected. You have a job. Because the great opera singers in Milan at the Scala, which incidentally is very small, and the great opera singers at the Metropolitan, they can't compete with you because they're over there and you're here. You see, so you have, some kind of protection. Therefore, the income of opera singers is going to be similar to that of dentists. Some dentists make a lot of money, some make less money, but the greatest dentist doesn't make much, much more than the average because, of course, you can't scale it. You can fill up the Scala, you can, do more than that. And then von Karajan, discovered that there's such a thing as television and such a thing as Deutsche Grammophon, where you can store your voice. What happened? 100 years later, a few opera singers, about 10 of them made 90% of the money. And the remaining opera singers worked. Starbucks was not a thing at the time, but most of their occupation was Starbucks. So that gives you an idea about connectivity. What did it do in the economic world? Okay, is that someone dead, like Pavarotti, can compete, okay, or his estate can actually get the income away from a young opera singer in Boston. Okay, so this is pretty much, this is connectivity for you. And then you can generalize to biological things like COVID. And in the Black Swan, I say that the pandemic would not be a Black Swan because of connectivity. Now, connectivity is a very good thing, but it has side effects. And if you don't know the side effects, all right, don't get too much into something. So what are these are the side effects of connectivity, is that you have a winner-take-all effect. So if you take income of athletes, 1950, the top athlete versus the average, 2-3 times, which people found excessive at the time, top athletes. Today it's 50 million euros versus, say, 35,000 euros. I don't know. I'm very bad at numbers, at dividing. So I can do algebra, but I can't do division. So divide 50 million by 35,000, and then you get an idea of the inequality that we have in that field. Okay, so the current environment produces these things. The Harry Potter effect, that 100 authors worldwide can live off, this is numbers as of 4 or 5 years ago, can live off of their income as authors. And then the rest, again, now they have Starbucks. There are other things. There are university programs where they teach people to write, who will end up teaching other people to write or stuff like that. I mean,
right.
So this is the winner.
So the rare event actually accounts for the greatest impact on the entire thing.
Exactly.
And if you average it out, you miss that. You miss that.
You miss that because it's driven by the tail, by the rare event, by the extreme.
Right.
There are two environments. One I call mediocristan, driven like if I take the weight of the people here, we put them on a scale, I'm sure in Dartmouth, the engineering department know how to build robust scales, no? And then we add to our sample the largest person you can find on the planet, the largest human being. It's not going to change the average much. All of us here, I don't know how many we have here, but say a couple of hundred, nothing. It's not going to make an impact on the average. Mm-hmm. But if you take the net worth and you add Elon Musk, okay, it was 100 some, but $200 billion versus. So you realize that there are some domains. Elon Musk would change the average, and it would be a high percentage of the total. So this is the effect of fat tails, and you got to figure out which domains produce fat tails and which domains don't. So we have a tableau. In the Black Swan, I did that years ago by saying this is the domain. Socioeconomic life is driven by fat tails. Your weight is not driven by fat tails. Like there's no meal you can have that will represent 98% of your annual consumption. You can try. I mean, you die, I think, after the first 2% or something like that. I mean, you die after the first 5,000 calories, so you can't reach. So, but you can lose all your money in a minute. This is, so you have this domain and the other domain.
Right, so go back to the epidemic, because that's interesting. You said the epidemic was actually not a Black Swan event, even though the particular virus might be considered a rare fat tail event.
Not having an epidemic is actually the rare event. Not having had an epidemic.
Right.
But let's look at connectivity, and the reasoning I had on Black Swan is as follows. If I have an island would have many more species per square meter than a continent. Okay? So what does it tell you? It tells you the continent has more inequality, right? A few species dominate in numbers. And if you open up all the islands to one another, you're going to have that. So we're going to have a winner-take-all in the biological field. So whatever virus you'll have would travel.
Right.
So the reasoning in the Black Swan was that there's such thing, I don't know if you've heard of Air France. Air France, they fly, they do New York, Paris. And at the time, I was irritated because they were not stopping Gabon during Ebola. There are other things like, so there's Air France, there's British Air, there's American Airlines, everybody has those, okay? So the Great Plague, I don't want to call it great, but it was a plague, all right? It was a bad plague. It took, I think there's some villages in the Lake District in England that was reached 340 years after Constantinople, okay? And it never reached the Americas and Oceania, okay? So you realize now you can have the same effect with a meeting like this one, where you have people from many countries, or particularly if you have conventions and people fly in and they can distribute to the Philippines, Mongolia, southwestern China, Argentina. Within a week, you'd have a worldwide pandemic. So that was the reasoning in the Black Swan, and I was wondering, no pandemic was taking place. And we haven't had anything of significance since the Spanish flu.
Right.
So, I mean, we had many bad things, but so the Black Swan for me was the absence of such a thing as COVID.
Right. So the irony here is that most people will think of the existence of this virus as a rare statistical event, but because of connectivity and the way in which you describe connectivity, the ability of that virus to spread is so baked into the network.
And there's no place to hide.
And there's no place to hide that we should not think of pandemics as rare events. We should assume that they're going to be predictable. They're rare, improbable,
exactly.
But the probability of their spread is very predictable.
But I was enraged during the pandemic at practically every single group, of different political groups. In the beginning, when we were waiting, we were a group of people, Yanir Bariam, myself, Complex, waiting, for the pandemic to emerge, to go back people to reduced connectivity. You don't need, all these things. All you need is reduced connectivity, and the Ottomans know how to do it. The Ottomans and Habsburg had something called lazarettos, quarantines. I grew up in Beirut. There's a quarantine, the quarantina, all right, had an Italian name. That was vessels would come in and put you for 40 days. Actually, quarantine was about 7 to 11 days, depending on where you came from. They had formulas. And the minute they hear a rumor of a quarantine, of a pandemic or the quarantina, all right? So you had quarantines. We don't need quarantines if you have testing, you see? So it took us 13 months from the inception of COVID, right, to have testing at the US border. And particularly, I don't know if you've been to JFK during, when planes come from all these places. And it looks like, the being in the subway car, everybody's contaminating everybody. So for 13 months, people didn't get the simple measures. So in the beginning, we started fighting for what we called exactly decoupling systems by putting fences around the system. So instead of lock in your house, you'd be locked out. And so the second thing is we had to fight people in psychology departments, finding it irrational for us to worry about a pandemic that killed 5,000 people worldwide when cancer was killing 5,000 people every day or something, right? So we couldn't explain to them the following reasoning. There's a fellow called Dr. Phil who went on television saying, at the time, COVID had killed 3,000 Americans. He said, 3,000 Americans have drowned in the swimming pool. So, why don't we shut down swimming pools because people drown in them? Why do we shut down because of COVID? The response is, if I drown in my swimming pool, odds are that the neighbor is going to drown in his swimming pool, or that probability increased. Whereas the probability has not increased, right? Whereas if I die of COVID, the odds that my neighbor is going to die of COVID has increased. So you got to look at the multiplicative effect of these things and forget about standard statistics. Again, mediocre stan is what people learn in business school and statistical classes. You're completely useless on a bell curve. The bell curve works very, very well if you do astrology, right? If you do astronomy. If you do medicine, it works, but it doesn't work in socioeconomic things. It doesn't work for pandemics. So we had to fight, and nobody was taking us seriously until we started producing papers in like Nature Physics, because physicists understood the mass immediately, and then people started taking us seriously.
Right.
And then you interviewed us, and
right.
You were.
Well, I remember also when we talked about it, I read that paper at the time, and one of the things you said in the paper as a kind of decoupling or quarantine was if everybody just wore a mask immediately.
Exactly. Even if you don't understand how it works, wear a mask. And the mask for masks also, they didn't get the nonlinearity. That part of the nonlinearity. It's complicated for fragility to explain the following. If I reduce viral load by 10%, I may reduce infection probability by 90%. You see, or risk of death by more than that. And the second thing, they couldn't figure out that if I wear a mask and I reduce my viral load by 10%, and you wear a mask, that you're looking at the joint effect of both masks, not just one.
Right.
So there have been a lot of papers on masks that we actually debunked a lot of them. But you don't need a paper. I mean, just understand that what you got to lose wearing a mask. What, you're gonna have a little bit of CO2 or something? It's not a big deal. People are not going to see your teeth, so it's okay, fine. Draw a smile on your mask. So we had to fight for masks. But the problem is in the beginning, the establishment, intellectual establishment, using pseudo-statistics, what I call the Pinker statistics, named after Steven Pinker in my books. So bad statistics are called naive empiricism. They were against measures, to fight COVID. And then it switched. Okay, the Trumpists became against the measures, and the other ones, because the Trumpists were against the measures, the other ones said, okay, let's take measures. But in the beginning, it's not like the polarization flipped at some point during that story.
So let's talk about fragility in this context, because that seems to me a critical insight that you've advanced. If you have networks that are susceptible to the catastrophic network effects that ensue, and that you have exponential spread, you then have a kind of fragile system which considers itself safe as long as it's just doing averaging, but is not at all safe if you take into account the catastrophic effects of tail events.
And also the acceleration effects.
And the acceleration effect.
So let me explain sort of like what happens in a system. So let me go back to nonlinearity. I can talk about it, it's not too complicated.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, right. So nonlinearity.
As long as you don't talk about convex and concave.
Okay, so if you jump, say if you jump 4 meters, you're going to be harmed a lot more than 4 times if you jump 1 meter. You agree? All right. And if you jump 10 meters, a lot more than 10 times 1 meter, because if you jump 10 meters, definitely there's an obituary in the darkness thing for you, correct? So there's what we call acceleration. I noticed that in finance, as a trader, if the market is down 1%, say you make 100,000, the market is down 10%, you make 20 million. From acceleration payoff. So that's what we call, let me use the word, negative convexity or convexity, concavity, whatever. So, or positive convexity in some cases. So there must be, then I noticed that everything in nature has to have this accelerated dose response, okay? And there's an argument, which is complicated, but let's say, so in other words, if you jump 4 times 1 meter, okay, it's a lot better than jumping 0, 0, 0, 0 than 4 meters. You agree? All right. So let's apply that to demand. Okay, a fragile system in demand. And there was a part of our conversation way before people were aware of the supply chain. If you consume 100 one year, say toilet paper, whatever it is, okay, and then 100 the next year, the average is 100. It's not going to stress the system in the same way that if you produce 0 one year, or demand 0 one year, and then 200 the next year, what happens if demand, you have hyperinflation, you have a deflation, then hyperinflation, all right? So that's exactly what happened with demand for anything, for bicycle parts to whatever. So have zero, demand went to 0 and then jumped, okay? And of course, also the stuff like Peloton, demand went to 100 and then went to 0, right? So it was a lot worse than 50 and 50. So the unevenly distributed stuff, if you're fragile, you want the distribution to be steady when you're fragile, when you're here. Right. You want the market to go down 1% one day and then 1% the other day. It's a lot better than 0 and then 2%. Right. Think that the effect is squares or whatever. So it's the same thing actually in price impact in the markets. If you want to buy 10 units, say $10 billion of whatever, the stocks, if you buy them all now, you're going to have financial problems. You're going to move prices. But if you buy over 10 days, no impact, okay? Right. Because 10 times, you know, it's 100 times the price change because it's in squares. Okay, 10 times is a lot, like 100 times 1. So that's the example of nonlinearity that have to be present. And I think that's the only idea I've ever had. Everything else is, you know, like comes from reading a lot of books and talking to grandmothers and grandparents and uncles and stuff. So this idea that our world, you got to realize where the fragilities are, and it's very simple once you understand where the vulnerabilities are based on nonlinearity.
Right.
So this is, and then the idea.
So for business school students, I just want to be for business school students, the clearest example of this are the efficiencies of just-in-time manufacturing, stuff like that. So fragility is, in a way, a function of an illusory understanding of efficiency, right?
The word efficiencies actually makes no sense.
Okay.
Okay, because so let me give you a little my background. Okay, I was a regular MBA person, then became a trader. Then, after being a trader, decided to become a mathematician. Right? People do things backwards. And then after that, I did practice, and then I did theory. Usually people do the reverse. They study, then they, So, and to me, a lot of things didn't make sense because I was a trader, trading complex instruments. So I did things backwards in a reverse sequence, going from practice to theory to practice. You see, you do the world differently. And so that was the thing. So we realized that a lot of the stuff we teach in some departments is excellent. A lot of stuff that's very bad because it doesn't match the nuances of reality, okay? Like mediocre stand, extreme stand. You can't talk about probability in the same way with a multiplicated process and a process like drowning in a swimming pool or falling from a ladder or having a heart attack. Okay, so there are different classes of risk. So this is sort of like my background. Right. So come into it. So
if you have, we actually talked about this because I was, for my sins, technology editor at the Harvard Business Review back in 1986, 87, when just-in-time manufacturing, we felt we had to compete with Japan at the time, and just-in-time manufacturing entailed our, doing away with storerooms and having good relationships with one supplier who would deliver just in time to your factory, so you wouldn't need a storeroom. And why have a lot of cash reserves? Because you want the money to be working for you. And it was all under the rubric of lean manufacturing, and it was a kind of efficiency idea, which was great and terrifically cost-effective.
Yes.
As long as there was no disruption.
Exactly.
And now we learned in COVID. What did we learn?
Yeah, but actually, even before that, the notion of efficiency, to me, is something that exists in textbooks, but doesn't exist in research. Let's take a very simple example, mergers. They say, okay, we're going to have a bigger firm. It's going to be more efficient on ground that you will have fewer people in personnel department and smaller number of cafeteria people per capita, whatever it is, and a fewer number of trucks or whatever. Okay, so they look at the numbers, they say it's going to be more efficient. But obviously it doesn't work because companies, large companies don't survive. Okay, and here in an instant, thought experiment, two companies come together. Okay, they should have huge advantage that they don't have. And papers have been since 1978 documenting the absence of gains from mergers. They say something is leaking somewhere. Till I figured it out when I started doing modeling on acceleration. I realized that there's such a thing as there's an animal called elephant, no? A mammal, all right, very cute and so on. There's an equivalent animal built almost the same way, called what? A mouse. Okay. Now, why is it that we have 8 million mice in New York? That more than we ever had elephants. Why? Because of a mouse, I don't know, I'm not suggesting, please don't accuse me of whatever, but if you throw a mouse out of the window, it will laugh at you. But if an elephant falls by 1 meter, breaks a leg, it's gone. Okay, and 1 meter is tiny for an elephant, okay? So you realize the same thing applies to corporations, because if they're squeezed into needing something, so we looked at a few case studies of corporations that had a squeeze that cost them a lot more than if they were small. And effectively, that explains, the first efficiency coming from size called economies of scale, this turns out to be completely S. They're stochastic diseconomies of scale, right? So there's an optimal size, okay? So, and then we look at other, stuff like efficiency of
Supply chain.
Supply chain, all right? Visibly, if you're going to be squeezed into a pain up, you got to count that in your model, all right? If eventually you're going to pay up. Everything's efficient, but let's say you have no chips. You're going to go begging for chips, no? Because your whole process is stopped. You have all these employees you got to feed, okay? You have all these things, or have all these things to deliver. Every day costs you a lot. So you're going to pay up for whatever you don't have. And guess what? You know, it's going to be taken out of, so there's an equilibrium. And the equilibrium is probably some economy of scale, not too much, some supply chain optimization, not too much. There's constraints is high. And then when I started looking mathematically at optimization models, I realized that they only made sense under a set of assumptions that completely gets destroyed if you vary one variable, okay? So, I mean, I looked at, first thing I looked at is Ricardo model of comparative advantage. That if you assume, you know, the Ricardian model that one country should produce cloth, the other one produce wine. But it assumed that the price of both is constant. But what if the price is not constant? So yeah, you know. So what if you have a problem with phylloxera that happened after Ricardo, destroying your wine crop? Okay. So all these are not part of the model. So I think the analogy I gave you is that if I drive 500 miles an hour in New York City, I say at 2 a.m., it's not going to be faster than 20 miles per hour. Actually, it's not going to be faster than 1 mile per hour because you're guaranteed to die. At 500 miles per hour, you're pretty much guaranteed to die. So there exists. So, and then the other thing I discussed in the Black Swan is why is it that nature, if it was efficient to have, you know, less that's useless stuff like feeding, you know, why does nature give us 2 kidneys? And I'm sure students at Dartmouth tend to have in general 2 kidneys, but you don't need 2 kidneys. You need only one kidney. And an economist would say, not even one. You just go to dialysis. You're carrying all this weight for nothing, right? So, there's no storm, and you're priced out of the market. You exist out of the gene pool, right? So
that's a perfect segue to talk about what steps you can take to be antifragile. That is to say, what things that you do to be robust, because I think that's really the entree into the question of AI. Like we are able to counter the dangers of fragility. How?
Okay, let me not be very gloomy by saying that number one, I like AI.
No, we're not with AI yet. I'm just talking in the current situation.
Yeah, okay, the current situation of connectivity actually is doing good things. Let me put a good word for connectivity.
Yeah, okay.
Right, let me before, right? In 1973, for those of you who were driving large car, you know you know what happened. 1973, there was an Arab oil embargo.
Oh yes.
You remember that, of course, all right? And then the American cars in 1973, I don't know if you've seen pictures, they could pretty much have this conference in a car. All right, they were very large. Okay, so they were like gas guzzlers. Gas was free, and cars got bigger, and then there's such a thing as Las Vegas, where cars were. So you had room. So cars were huge. Okay, and 73 came. Now, what happened after 73? Compact cars started to show up everywhere, okay? And the cars shrank, and the demand for oil dropped to the point that the state of Texas was nearly bankrupt. But definitely the Soviets were bankrupt. Okay, so it took like from 1973 to the early 80s for the adaptation to take place. Okay, so that's in the 70s. Now there is, I think, the Nobel Prize of, I don't know if there's no such thing yet for Nobel Prize for environmental studies. It should be given to Vladimir Putin. Because by cutting the gas, it took Germany 6 months to adapt. Okay? So he helped the cause of environmentalism because what took 6 or 7 years of reduction in demand and adaptation and stuff like that happened in 6 months because of that Russian thing. He thought that it's going to be like the Arab embargo and everybody's going to suffer and the Germans are going to come to their knees to beg for mercy, give us natural gas, we need you, so God save Russia. But no, it didn't work because they adapted very quickly. So our world can adapt much faster than you think. And I remember posting something on Twitter right before I bought a Tesla. All right, I made a mistake in my life. So I posted that how this is great. We said we have like convexity, a source of energy, free energy, and stuff. The electricity is free. That you stuff, and I got all these insulting things, including a letter from the chief investment officer of a major firm, how I should be ashamed of saying something like that. And sure enough, we have many more electric vehicles, and much more solar power, and it's growing.
Right.
So adaptation is a lot faster. Sorry?
You're coming at this on a slant. I mean, what you're saying, what I hear you saying is that by stressing the system, you're proving the adaptability of people within these networks. And that
but that's happening faster than in the past.
Yeah, I agree.
With, got good things, got bad things, and now we got good things as well.
I agree, but I'm trying to set up your own insights with regard to how you create a more robust system in advance of this kind of stress. In other words, you spoke about breakers and storerooms and cash reserves and the things. I mean, one way to understand it is like the separation of powers in the United States. The biggest danger that the founders understood was that of a tyrant. And somehow they made something that appears less efficient. Like the American government operates less efficiently than you imagine it being able to, but the reason for doing that is because of all the breakers, in a way, that they've put in to avoid the big catastrophe, which would be a tyrant. So there are ways in which you can create a more robust system, when you take the all-in cost of putting in these breakers, rather than just looking at the immediate inefficiency.
They are definitely. I mean, I gave a metaphor that's very easy. Years ago, they say you have two twin sisters, and they have an identical business, same revenue base, but one of them makes $4 a share, the other one makes $1 a share. The one that makes $4 a share doesn't pay for insurance, doesn't have any stuff like that, and the stock market's going to love her, but she's going to go bankrupt, with probably one eventually. Because if you look at mortality rate, it's just like in medicine, all right? So you have an average expected life expectancy of maybe 6 or 7 years, right, for these firms.
Right.
But security analysts won't pick it up. The other sister makes $1 a share, but she can survive, provided that her board or something doesn't try to fire her, to hire someone like the other sister. So the thing is, we don't have to go through time series and data to figure it out. We can just look at inventory of the firms, okay? You know what can blow up a firm. Okay?
Right.
You pretty much know. What is it? Debt, operational leverage, central thing. We figure out on the list. Each firm has its vulnerability. You don't do that. Why? Because it costs money. Right. Real owners of companies, this is why we have a survival of family-owned companies, intergenerational, for hundreds of years in Japan, in Europe, even here, because they have skin in the game. Right. Whereas an employee has this asymmetry. You see, you want to accumulate as many bonuses and then send a postcard, say, I'm enjoying my retirement on a golf course. By the way, I'm sorry about your bankruptcy, right? Right. So that's the Jack Welch trade. I was going after Jack Welch when he was like sacrosanct. It was like So like going after Aquinas or someone, going after Jack Welch,
Right, right.
In circles. The guy is stuffing the company with what I call short optionality, these things that explode. And incidentally, let me confess one thing. I made my money, and retired from it, betting on blow-ups of companies that have hidden risk, okay, like Fannie Mae. And I wrote in the Black Swan, Fannie Mae is sitting on a barrel of dynamite, and everybody laughed at me, but I had the last laugh because we made tons of money from the bankruptcy, from its insolvency, and then of course later on as funding. So I don't hide that we that have skin in the game in the sense that we bet on tail events
Right.
that are not.
But you're implying
seen.
that the people who ran Fannie Mae didn't. I mean, they
had no idea.
They were making their bonuses, and they didn't necessarily
They had
lose
no idea.
anything.
No, they said they had 15. They counted the New York Times. I said in the New York Times that they're sitting on dynamite. When I saw their P&L,
Yeah.
Accelerating losses, for widening thing, I said they're going to go bankrupt. I told the New York Times. I told the fellow who turned to be COVID denier, Berenson, who interviewed me. He showed me secret reports. I told him they're going to go bankrupt. He said, "You say it publicly?" I said, "Of course, shout it. I can tell the doorman. I'm going to tell people in the street. They're going to go bust." All right. They eventually went bust, but they countered. This is nonsense. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We have 15 mathematicians. So of course I countered, but they didn't publish it in the New York Times, that it can have 15 mathematicians, 150 mathematicians, 1,500 mathematicians, 15 billion mathematicians. It won't make a difference, right? You're still going to go bankrupt. And sure enough, they almost went bust without the taxpayer, without the generosity of you and us taxpayers. So we have it's not just Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae was, to me, a model of firms like that are going to go blow up. Yeah. So you can express the bet with other firms, not with that. Yeah. And that was the banking crisis 2007.
Right.
And that's what people noticed me.
Right.
But the Black Swan was written right then. Okay. So now let's look at use the same analysis and apply it to who's going to blow up. So it's very simple. You take a firm, you see how many suppliers they have. Well, odds are that in 2003, they had 18 suppliers for a product. But the accountants over time made them get one supplier in Newhant, or Converge, all right? Like a very large firm that I know, had 15 suppliers, and now one in Newhant. Okay, but of course they deserve what happened to them.
Yeah.
Okay, but because it was cheaper. But things are not cheap. But there's a middle way. What's the halfway is if you need supplies, make sure that all your suppliers are not in the same basket. Okay. So,
right.
All right. Diversify. It's one-on-one diversification. Okay. So.
And skin in the game.
And skin in the game, of course. If you lose. The other, so there's a lot of things you can do. But then, as a society as a whole, I think the job of the government is to protect us from tail events. That's my definition of government. That sort of, some people think the government, like in the EU, should meddle with how much energy your vacuum cleaner uses. I think that the rest of things the government is there for pandemics and things like that. Okay, that we have a reserve for oil, but we didn't have one for chips.
Right.
We have so we have to identify.
Vaccines. We didn't have a reserve for vaccines.
Oh, we weren't planning for this event.
That's right.
And the only intelligent person, because from 2013 on, Yanni Baryam and I went talking to people, tell them, listen, a pandemic is coming. Are you ready? The only place where these people had a game plan that was very precise, Singapore. Mm-hmm. And guess what? And the person retired, so it wasn't as good as when he was there. Phil something, right? He was head of civil service in Singapore. And he knew, he said, yes, and this is what we're doing for this. And he taught us, basically, we learned more from him than our argument. So there are some places, but not the job of the government is to have contingency plan in case of pandemic. And we know we're going to get that big one. I mean, COVID was very bad. but it was more like a dress rehearsal for the real one. Think about it, the antibiotic-resistant strain that once it's out, plus with aging of the population, it will transmit. So there are things that will, that you got to consider. The problem is epidemiologists, I hope I'm not offending too many people, but epidemiologists, their models were using Gaussian, they were not using, power law tails. When we wrote that in Nature Physics, the physicists got it right away. They say, how come they're not using it? I say, yes, they published their article, and people were shocked. It's a completely different culture.
Well, now that you've frightened me with the idea of a universal pandemic of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, I feel like I'm somehow scanting the problem by turning to AI, which seems by comparison, by comparison, a rather hypothetical event. But I do, before we get to questions, which I hope to in within 5 minutes, I just want you to try to apply what you mean by antifragility to a network where nodes in the network suddenly are on steroids because of AI. How can we apply this? Yeah.
Let me go back to COVID. In a way, we were lucky. COVID was a bad thing. It killed 20-some million people worldwide, very bad. But it's sort of like it taught us, all right? So just assume that the big one came before COVID, okay? So, and the internet saved us with COVID. Just assume if we didn't have, as a sequence, we had COVID, then the internet versus internet, then COVID, okay?
Right.
So we were, but now we're more prepared for the next one. So we don't have a lot of selling to do, to say, okay, you test at the border, you close the border, you do this, you do this, you do this. We know the game plan. And probably for a generation it's gonna hold. And there's Zoom, which I'm sure you're fed up with it. Okay, I am fed up with it. He made me teach a class on Zoom. For me, going to a dentist is better than teaching a class on Zoom. But nevertheless, it allows us to function. So so we have things. So antifragile, there are systems that have this property that without stressors, they get weaker. That's what I noticed. Doctors call it hormesis. And I figured out the modeling of it comes from convexity. Once you define fragility, you have the reverse of fragility. And it's the same equation, it's a minus sign. Because the minus, one is concave, the other is convex. So you tell yourself if a system is antifragile, then it needs to be stressed, okay? Otherwise, it dies. And natural systems don't get information via the New York Times. How do they get it? Via stressors. So if you have a Mediterranean skin, I think you qualify as Mediterranean skin, you go in the sun, all right, what happens? You tan, okay? Why do you tan? Your body gets a signal that this is the intensity, so it's protection for 10% more intensity. I'm sure you have a gym here. You have a gym in Dartmouth? There's a gym. You go to the gym, you lift 100 pounds. What happens to your body? It prepares for 110 pounds. It upregulates. So there are a lot of things. And now, if you tell us what is the converse of it, the bad news is that if something needs stressors and doesn't get stressors, what happened to it? It weakens. You see? So just assume that if you spend 6 months in bed, no stressors, no germs, nothing, no classes, no Starbucks, no bad coffee, nothing. All right, you're in bed for 6 months. And then you get out of bed. What happens? First of all, your bones, would be weaker. And of course, you're gonna, the first germ, and if you're in a completely germ-free room, what's gonna happen to you, you're probably not gonna survive.
Right.
So there is this idea that, you need stressors up to a point. You need some stressors. And things upregulate. And I learned that, this one thing is maybe sort of I'm trying to explain why I'm not a good speaker. I don't want to be a good speaker. Because if you speak like this, you have to make an effort to understand me or to you'll remember more what I'm talking about. You upregulate. So now this is sort of like
Okay, but I still want to make it easier on them. Just a second. So apply this to AI. I mean, we normally think, I mean, people have talked about this. You wouldn't be in the room, I suppose, unless you were concerned to some extent with AI. Well, no, you'd be in the room to see Nassim anyway. But if with AI, we have these nodes in networks that have these capabilities, and you spoke about the various capabilities of AI at lunch today, which I want you to share with me. But what can we do if government's responsibility is to protect us from tail events?
Yeah, I'm not worried about AI, and let me start why.
Good. So
let me tell you why I'm not. I'm more worried about the pandemic, and I'm vastly more worried on my list about debt. And I don't know if you own real estate, but we had, because of bad policy, Federal Reserve, zero interest rates, we have a bubble. And they're not able to manage it, keep raising rates. There's a lot of debt in the system. So we have, to me, these are the big problems. AI is not a problem for several reasons. Number one, I happen to have my day job is, happen to do statistical modeling. And we've been doing neural net forever. Neural net in finance, and always failed, but we do it forever. And also, people, what do you mean by AI? There are different things. There's machine learning, there's LLM, which ChatGPT is, and we'll focus on that in a minute. And then you have robotics. Robotics, do you have a thermostat in your car? Now you put 68 degrees. If it's higher, it shuts off. So we've had that forever, for a long time. I mean, okay. So it's not like we're just, making it more advanced. But people were not afraid of thermostat, and now suddenly they think robots are going to take over the world, right? So we got other things to worry about before. But let me talk about ChatGPT. As a trader, I learned one thing, as an option trader. And I had a saying, if you have any reason to buy a stock or an option, don't buy it. Why? Because it's already in the price, okay? Now, let me explain what ChatGPT does, basically. It takes all the conversation and gives you the most likely. Maybe not that precise conversation, but the most likely one that resembles it. And the first thing I did is try to trick it, because during the day I do nothing except bicycling now, and a little bit of math in the morning, and then the rest of the time I got time to kill. So I said, let's strip ChatGPT. Okay. So you go to the obvious point, is that what does ChatGPT? It's just verbalistic. It takes words. So you can trip it by either making it say two things that are contradictory because of its verbalism, but that's complicated. So I did that, of course, and say, oh, I got a home run. So let's see why ChatGPT cannot run anything. And let me tell you why. It's a great clerk, right? It cannot run. Clerk doesn't run, it assists. Let me explain the thing. The first thing is there was at the Congress of Berlin, there's been a war between, on one part, Greece and Western powers, the other one, the Ottoman Empire. And there was a fellow called Constantine Karatheodoris, okay, who was representing one power. So I asked ChatGPT, what was the function of Constantine Karatheodoris at the Congress of Berlin, where they had to sign a peace agreement, a treaty between Greece and Western countries versus the Ottoman Empire? Of course, it thought, because his name was Greek, and he was an ethnic Greek, that he represented Greece. Who did he represent? The Ottoman Empire, Karatheodori Pasha. So you know immediately, what does it do? It doesn't know the answer, but it gives you the most likely answer, okay? And that's exactly what's going to bankrupt you, because that's already in the price. I tripped it. Another one was my village, the Battle of Amiens. My village is a Byzantine village in Lebanon. So there was a battle that happened, according to the record, a century after the Arab invasion. So there was a battle between the Byzantine army and the Maronite, some Christian sect that was pushed up the mountain. So we asked ChatGPT, what happened at the Battle of Aymund, and it told you it's between the Islamic invaders and the thing, because most likely it's a battle, you know. So when you take the corners, how are you going to make money? You're not going to make money with an existing idea. If it makes sense, you're not going to make money because it made sense. A lot of people tried, they failed, and you don't hear about it, okay? Because people don't they don't talk a lot about the failure, right? So that was the idea. If you look at ChatGPT, it cannot come up with a theory of relativity because it's not part of the discourse. It would dismiss it. You see? Right. So it is. So that's why I'm not worried about it. And you can't run anything. You're just an assistant. It's excellent if you want to write a condolences letter. It's always very complicated. I have friends who are Muslims, friends who are Jewish, friends who are Catholic, and then I have to make sure I use the right wording. You know, like you don't say ad vitam aeternam, to the eternal life, to a Jewish condolences letter. I learned from ChatGPT, so you write one. You see, let his memory be eternal. Yeah. Okay, so for example, ChatGPT is great for that because it gives you the most likely thing that people say. But if you want to progress, you don't progress by saying the obvious. You don't progress, you progress only with the corners. So this is where,
So I can't resist asking you, is it possible then that the great, even call it Black Swan danger of ChatGPT is, if what you're saying is true, that it's always sort of giving you sort of the most likely average response.
Exactly. The mediocre, the most mediocre assistant you can ever have.
Right.
So think about it. That's how it's by design, because it reflects. Yeah.
Right. But if we become more and more and more pleased to have this assistant, is the difficulty and maybe the danger that we are going to meet them halfway and ourselves become mediocre. I mean, that's the thing that kind of bothers me.
I think, okay, so we are becoming, I agree with this. This is what we're arguing about at lunch. But let me come in with one word. Have you heard of, there's Flaubert's Dictionary of Received Ideas.
Yeah.
As a parody, like what people would say, that's a received idea usually, and the crowd is wrong. So this is pretty much like the dictionary of received idea. So, but what happened, that I have a problem. I didn't know I was good in math because I can't count and subtract very well. I can't divide. So I had a 12C, luckily. And I became a trader with a 12C. I became adapted. So what happened is that I'm still, my 12C calculator, which incidentally I have now on my iPhone, I turned it to 12C. Right. So I can't compute a tip in a restaurant without it, all right? So but it frees you up to do other things. So you become more mediocre at driving. I used to get lost driving home. Now definitely without Google Maps, I get lost, going around the corner, all right? So I'm a worse driver than in the past. Sailors are worse navigators than they were in the time of Columbus, when you had 3 ships and how you could follow one another, especially at night, all right, and communicate, all right? So they were much better sailors than today, but you free up that time, I become very mediocre, all right, in things that I'm mediocre in, where I use that machine, and I'm going to be better in other things, okay? So this is where technology can free you up to do other things. But people think that ChatGPT will replace people. I think what it will do is what I learned from my translators. You know that translators lie, all right? One of the lies is I don't use Google Translate. Never heard of it. I don't know what it is. So I know some translators used to translate 2-3 books a year. In 2000, when I had my first book translated. And now the same translators translate 7 or 8 books. How? So Google Translate is not replacing translators, but translators are using it for efficiency, for the first cut and stuff like that. Right. And then, of course, they make sure that your text doesn't look like Google Translate by changing words here and there. So this is pretty much what will happen when people say that in imaging we're going to pattern recognition will replace radiologists. It probably would have fewer radiologists, okay, because they could process maybe 100, X-rays a day versus 10, okay, and this is where it's very useful.
Right. Or there are parts of the world that don't have radiologists at all, and now will. It's parts of the world.
Because you'd have one radiologist service a lot more. So it will bring down the cost of medicine or make it more efficient.
Right.
But it will free up medicine to do other things. Focus on headaches, for example, or maybe curing bad humor. Right. That's to me is whatever. I'll things that are more important. I mean, very important, but completely neglected. So it frees you up. Like driving, Google Maps freed me up to compose maybe other things. I became worse now at composing spontaneously a condolences letter, but I know now I have a format for what Sunni. This is the optimal format. This is for Shiite. This is for Maronite. This is for Greek Orthodox. This is for religious Jew. This is for secular Jew. So I have the format. So you see what. So I'm worse writer for condolences letter, but probably I have more time to write aphorism on Twitter, all right? So, you see, there is
I'll have to remember this when I write my thank you letter to you.
Okay.
we should actually go to audience for questions. Yes, sir. Just wait for the microphone. Someone is going to deliver a microphone to you.
I can speak loud. My question is very simple. Talking about Black Swans, and you mentioned debt, U.S. debt. I'm curious if you would comment on how you perceive the possible outcomes given the increasing U.S. debt and our inability to service it.
We have, I think that we're conscious of it. I mean, this country is very adaptable. Nobody would have thought that would have 5% interest rates, 7.7% mortgages today.
Yeah.
And then we went from 2% to 7.7% mortgages. So some countries are very adaptable, and it's the most adaptable probably country on the planet. So, but there's one thing about debt that happened. We have had some inflation that reduced debt in a way, all right? And then also there's a Lebanese expression, it got a bit big before it gets smaller. You gotta get bigger before it gets smaller. So in other words, now we realize what's going on with these problems in Congress. And some people are realizing that the thing cannot last long, and you can't keep borrowing. Okay, the government has to have some kind of model for to reduce that. But there's a positive thing I would say, is that the government has, because of the zero interest rate policy, has accumulated debt. But there's a lot of, that swelling of assets. That's a lot of profits for the government, because there's such a thing as income tax, capital gains tax. So government has accumulated assets that people are not noticing during the bubble, right? So but overall, I'd say that people are conscious of the problem now, and I'm glad people are fighting in Congress. Because on one hand, you have a tension between, it's like optimization under no constraint. So you optimize social justice. You'd like to, but you need to have constraints. Like you have a wallet, you have what's in your wallet. And you can't borrow forever. And so people are conscious of it. And once you have the solution would be probably easier. Plus, we got, I think AI would do something, which is increase productivity in some domains, as we're noticing. The Google Scholar translator productivity, right? So a lot of things will come that, but so we're not Japan yet, and other countries will suffer more before we suffer.
I had a question about AI and regulation. A number of AI innovators are going to Congress and asking for regulation, which looks a lot like Stigler's insight that firms demand regulation to raise barriers to entry. And of course,
Exactly.
highly regulated firms are the most profitable firms. would you agree that what's happening is a Stiglerian thing where they're trying to raise barriers to entry, or is there some noble intent there?
Those clamoring for regulation are those the most threatened by AI. I mean, I was an arbitrage trader, and you know what regulation means, because you give me a country where they have a lot of regulations. You hire 3 lawyers. Okay, one lawyer is in Japan. Japan was the most regulated financial market. So you hire a lawyer in Japan, one in London and one in New York. Okay, and then the regulation, what does it do? It causes arbitrage, because there's some, you can't short stocks in Japan. So you can make tons of money. Wherever you have regulation, you can make tons of money finding ways to reproduce the same product built in another way. Like, for example, you can't go short stocks in Japan, so you buy the index. Okay, you buy all the stocks, but you could short the index. So you have a flat book, and someone wants to short a stock. You short the stock at a huge fee. You know, you remove one stock from your long, so you have net synthetic short, for example. So this is an elementary trade, but there are more complicated trades. So regulations are. I'm for skin in the game, not regulations. I'm for tort, because you can't game tort. You cause a problem, you pay for it. Regulations usually allow. I had a fight with this guy. He's at Princeton. He was vice chair of the Fed. Trying to sell.
Bernanke?
No, another fellow. There's a fellow. I was in Davos. The only time I went. Sorry? Alan Blinder. I was in Davos, and the fellow say, "Oh, it's incredible. This, how can we protect ourselves? You know, the world I'm talking about. An American citizen, Citibank may go bust. How can I get cash? I'm in Switzerland. Stuff like that. Oh no, I got protection. What is it? So, you know, FDIC insurance, they insure you for per account, not per individual. So you give them $20 million, and they open up, I don't know, it's 25 accounts or 50 accounts, something for you. And then therefore, I told him that this is unethical, you know, because basically rich people can benefit. He said, no, we got a lot of former regulators on our staff. Then I started the crusade against regulation, because I realized that regulation allow regulators to later on sell their services because they know the inside. I mean, some regulations are necessary, but it's like speed limits. Some are necessary. But torts, all right, are vastly more powerful because they can't be gamed. And torts, and that's a left-wing concept. It started with Ralph Nader, so actually dedicated the book to Ralph Nader. Torts are vastly more robust than regulations. So I think with AI could be you can use a tort system. You say you're responsible, but people to regulate basically the regulations. People calling for regulation with AI either don't understand anything or they are afraid of it because it hurts their business. But think about it. If we slow down AI growth in this country and the Chinese develop AI, what happens? We're going to have to learn Mandarin now as first language because basically you're invaded, all right? So you have to realize that there is you can't really stop research on grounds that it hurts Elon Musk's business, okay?
It's helping
AI.
Elon Musk.
Sorry?
It's helping Elon Musk, but he's got...
He wanted to regulate it first. He scared him. Maybe he woke up one day, thought it was bad for him.
Right, but he also has one of the most robust AI networks going with self-driving cars and the neural net.
Yeah, but this is not working. Self-driving is not working. There are problems. This is where there are some mathematical things that even if every individual car is self-driving, you see the problem is you have to make them all.
Right.
All cars on the road got to follow the same protocol.
Right.
When you see flocks of birds, they all follow the same protocol. Right. So you got to, instead of doing it bottom up, you got to do it top down for the cars. So this is why I doubt that it's going to go very far, except for using some things, temporarily. You can't have a self-driving car as easily as you think. If all the cars were self-driving, okay, you need to have one unified protocol. Right. And to get that, I think maybe your great-great-great-great-grandchildren may hear something similar of the sort.
So we have to get rid of human beings to have self-driving cars, I guess. Yes?
I guess one thing you've spoken out.
Wait for the mic.
Thanks. First off, thanks so much for coming up to Hanover. One thing that you've spoken out against before is like reading newspapers.
Yeah.
I'd love to like hear you expand a little bit on that, and I guess as a follow-up, like how you suggest staying informed.
Okay, so the problem of information is that the anecdote is very salient.
The what?
The anecdote is very salient.
Yeah.
So when you read newspapers, you're focusing on anecdotes, and early on, I realized as a trader that all these people are talking about things that don't connect to the importance of the events. You see, like all these analyses that make no sense. All right. So I realized also that the newspaper should be 1,000-page long on some days and 1 page long on other days, right? In accordance to statistical significance of what happened, right? Yeah, they're the same length. So I stopped reading papers when I became a trader, and it's very easy because it freed up time to do other things. And other people reading the papers were out of business anyway. So that's the idea of the anecdote. You see anecdotes, you don't see them in context. Okay, and the same thing with the news. But you develop tricks to only read about large deviations. Large deviations are more explainable. But the market, they tell you, oh, the market went up 10 points, tiny, based on conversation with this and this. And as I showed in the Black Swan, they said bond market up on Saddam capture, and then later in the afternoon went down. Bond market down on Saddam capture. I mean, they look at, so you're pretty much wasting your time. And I have this aphorism: if you want to be curious read newspapers, spend some time reading the previous year's newspapers. And then you realize how silly it was to read that newspaper, because, so how much time you wasted. And then you can free up your time to read other stuff, like articles by Professor Avishai, for example. Even the New York, I said at that time, don't read if you're going to read the newspaper, read the weekly one. And now I think you should read a yearly newspaper. So but news get to you organically. If there's something going on, then you know to look for the news. You're not being supplied with the news.
Right. Yes. Sorry.
Hi. So the first thing you said about AI is that...
Could you speak in the mic?
Oh, yeah. The first thing you said about AI is that you're not worried because we've had these sorts of things for a long time, like the thermostat automatically adjusts. But it sort of reminds me of Dr. Phil's anecdote of the swimming pool. And the thing which worries me about AI is the possibility of recursive self-improvement. And I think that this is a good example of an accelerating tail event where for a long time things seem stable and normal, but once you pass a threshold where AIs can recursively self-improve, things can get out of hand very quickly, and they are something worth worrying about, even though we've had swimming pools for a long time.
There's things to worry about, like recursive self-improvement, where it starts learning from itself, and then the size. You need to have a lot of things going wrong for it to start learning from itself, and then spontaneously, and then running the world. I think the reverse actually is happening with AI, the language models, is that progressively it's actually the reverse, is that it's progressive self-degradation. And let me tell you how it happens. Is that when you use ChatGPT, it's calibrated to some information up, say, to 2021. And now you use it and you populate the web with information based on what you got from ChatGPT. And then guess what ChatGPT is learning from? Itself. So it's more likely, so the counter to that is I'm more worried about a self-licking lollipop. Where basically it is recursive in the opposite direction. It's self-degradation. It's like so this is what I'd be worried about with a lot of AI models.
So you put that so much better than I did. Does that satisfy you?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's definitely a concern. AI is training on their own data, but I think that within these labs like OpenAI, the thing that they understand the most is AI engineering. The very first thing that they're testing these models, trying to get them to do, is to help them with their work. So I do think that there is still a capacity for recursive self-improvement.
So you'd have evolution. You'd have some system of self-improve at the expense of others and stuff like that. But I mean, we have bigger problems ahead of time, namely a pandemic. We have things. how to handle pandemic, debt. We have the fact that zero interest rate destroyed financial knowledge for an entire generation, 15 years, 16 years, generation of trainees in finance. So we have, so the lady has a question.
Yeah, kids on TikTok too. Yes, go ahead.
I usually, when you allocate, of course you have ladies, but then also if you're going to take people who don't have hair. Okay.
Hi, thanks for
Smile
coming.
when you say that.
Thanks for coming here to Dartmouth. During the Arab Spring, I kind of realized that that was maybe the last time we could ever trust video footage from a scene where things were really happening, and now it's really, really here. AI can create videos, not only pictures, but live videos from a single photograph. I think it's going to make everybody a lot more skeptical, which may be a good thing, but what do you think about that?
Okay, so this is a great thing because I wanted to discuss it today, and at lunch I told you what I did.
Yeah.
So the people have the feeling that this information is something new that came from social media. Okay, but you got to realize the French Revolution. You know the story of the stories of Marie Antoinette. They were a complete smear campaign with all fake news, and they're produced in London and called libelles. Well, actually, the word libel, I think, is generated from that, where people would be, and they can sue anyone in London because they had freedom in London, and harming the French was a good thing. No court will. So they were printed in London, these pamphlets, and crossed on fishermen's boats, right, and then supplying all kind of fake news. So we have a long history of fake news and how we handle fake news in the past. And of course, there's a counter to fake news, which is the fact that I, for example, like to bust stuff, and we have a mechanism to bust stuff. Even Twitter has it. It tells you that this is not true. And I during COVID, people producing all kind of fake statistical tricks that it's easier to bust now than in the past. And the protocol of sages of science, right?
Okay,
That's
go ahead.
fake news, right?
Yeah.
Produced at a time that the protocol of sages of science was a pamphlet produced during the Tsarist era. Actually, the Russians were expert at it. They produced en masse. They produced the protocol of sages of Zion, saying that the Jews wanted to take over the world. Exactly the same language you hear now about Soros and a bunch of people, the World Economic Forum, trying to program you with vaccines so they can, own the world. And
well, for us, fake news is the book of Luke. That's so anyway. So we have had fake news about historically. There's even fake news in the Talmud. About Jesus being the son of a Roman soldier called Pantera. Oh yes,
yes,
Pantera. That's right.
So Yehoshua ben Pantera. That was it. So there's a lot of fake news. So historically, so thanks for your question. It's a great question. Can we trust stuff on the web? And I think that we have an antidote we didn't have in the past. You cannot believe how many people in Egypt believe today in the protocol of sages of Zion. Whereas if you put the fake news on Twitter, you're going to have people countering it. And these people develop authority naturally because they spend their time countering it. Mm. I never expected that thanks to COVID, I reached 1 million subscribers on Twitter. Yeah. And during COVID, a fellow called me up and said, listen, I'm going to tell you one thing. I don't like your style. I think you're arrogant and rude. Okay. But I'm going to tell you one thing. The New York Times, they're boring, polite, boring, and so on. And people don't. That if you attack the fake news, okay, will have more impact. She said, I don't like your style. I confirmed, but I need you. So he likes my style visibly. So I play a role, for example, against fake news, and I tell you there's this nonsense that you need against BS. You need 1,000 times more effort to remove BS than to put it in. It's not true. I don't believe the things correct themselves very quickly.
Last question. Yes, sir.
How do you get more skin in the game for civil servants, politicians, and CEOs?
Okay, so politicians.
Do you want to add to that? Because
Also, educational institutions where there's no stock options or things like that.
Okay, the first thing, skin in the game. Okay, for politicians, but first of all, you should have limited. You should have decentralization. That's solve some of the problem, because if you give more municipal power, people live in a community, so they already have more naturalistic skin in the game. That's how Switzerland works. And then term limits. Okay, so term limits definitely. So nobody, it also removes some wedge between people who become professional politicians versus normal human being. And so this is how it can work. And also, I think polarization, it's not popular to believe that polarization is good, because I like politicians to hate one another. Because then they can't become a caste that runs us by having fake disagreement. Like in Lebanon. In Lebanon, they love one another secretly. So they became a caste, and then they start, like in Congress, they give themselves perks, for example. But if they hate one another, these things become more difficult. We're talking, and I about the idea of collaboration doesn't work as well as competition and adversarial collaboration. Right. So this is where I think polarization is helping. But for politicians, the only thing you can do is term limit. And then the second question for educational universities, I think we have a problem with student debt. Okay, and basically, I'm a professor, and I say openly, I'm in an institution that there are a lot of real estate developers made a lot of money. Okay, so student debt should not be the responsibility of society, but those who made money from it. So institution, if you make them accountable for student debt, after a while, somehow, then they would probably there'd be a chain. The real culprits are, the real estate developers. That's where large money went there, and large money went on fat administration with multiplication of administrative positions, like someone responsible for winter entertainment, one's responsible for improving your life. Like I got this email from the well-being program at NYU. What the hell do I need a well-being program from NYU? You can buy it from the market. So you realize when there's money, they spend it. So it will make it more efficient, because the cost of education, when you look at Germany, the cost of education is something like 1 order of magnitude less to produce the same than the United States. You wonder where's the difference? The difference is partly real estate, partly administration, not so much faculty.
By the way, if you're afraid of faculty liking each other, don't worry. Thank you, Nassim. Thanks. It's always such a pleasure to hear you, to think about what you think about, and such a pleasure that you drove all the way up to Dartmouth. I mean, the leaves are great, but still, I mean, I'm really very grateful. We're all very grateful that you came.
This is a great campus, and don't tell anybody, this is a great retirement place.
I know. Thank you.
So thanks.